guys, welcome to this brand new series, Spring Boot Advanced Concept. So here we will be talking mostly about the advanced concept of Spring Boot, like microservices, caching, and the Spring Cloud, Spring Security, and all the API gateways and everything. So if you have not watched my previous video where we have discussed about the Spring Core and the Spring REST API, I encourage you to watch that series where I have completed the Java full stack with Angular and Spring Boot. So without wasting much of the time, let's get started with the concept of Spring Boot caching. So the very first thing that we have to understand about the caching is in Spring Boot, caching is used to store frequently accessed data temporarily so that a repeated request can be served faster without hitting the database or external APIs every time. So why use caching? Caching improves the performance and reduces the database load, and by which we get the faster response time and useful for ready read heavy applications. So we'll understand how caching works, and we will see uh, I'll try to make it as simple as possible because in this example, since I've already connected to the database and I've shown you how do you update, insert, retrieve, and all those stuff, I'll not be writing all that into this particular caching demo. So I'll try to make it very, very simple uh, as much as possible. Fine. So let's get started without wasting much of the time. So very first thing, we have to download a new Spring Boot project. So for that, we'll go to Spring Initializer start.spring.io, and from there, what we will do is we'll create a group. Let's call it as com.springboot dot caching. Fine, and let's call it as com.springboot dot caching as the uh, package name, and the artifact I will call it as caching demo. Okay, so let this be caching itself. Fine. So Spring 4 version, and with this you will simply require a dependency that is going to be a web dependency, which we have used for RESTful application development. And one important thing you have to notice here is that whenever I write cache, here we don't have a Spring Boot starter cache. You can see that Spring Cache Abstraction IO is available, that actually provides cache related operations such as the ability to update the content of a cache, but does not provide the actual data store. So because we don't have a Spring Boot starter cache here, what we can do is we can go to the MVN repository, and here we can just type in Spring Boot cache, and there you can get a Spring Boot starter cache, and go to that particular link. And once you get into that, you just simply select the link, and let me take 4.10, the starter cache, and the Maven project is something that we have downloaded. If you see in the initializer here, Maven project, so that's why I'm taking Maven. If it was a Gradle, I would have taken the Gradle dependency thing. Fine. So we will copy this Spring Boot starter cache from here, and then once this is done, we will download this just with one single dependency, that is the web dependency. So once this project is downloaded, we know that we have been doing this in Spring Boot, so we can simply go here, and then we can import that project over here, right? So let's import the project, the existing Maven project, and since that project is downloaded, let's it is downloaded as a zip. So let's extract that project here. Okay, so once we extract this caching demo, what we will do is we'll go to our Eclipse and then import that project here, existing Maven project. Next, and then we will go to browse, and then we have downloaded that into the downloads. So we'll go to the downloads. This is a caching demo, the Maven project. Let's hit finish. So let's close the previously opened files, closed it, and there we go. We should now have the caching demo. So let it import all the required dependencies. Okay, so first time use, obviously it downloads all the dependencies. So once that is done, once the dependencies and everything is downloaded, what I will do is we can once again, you can go to a Maven repository and then type in the Spring Boot starter cache, and then select any version. I always recommend you to select a version less than the current version because that would be the latest stable version. So once this project is ready here, once it is all imported, you will see that the structure of the project looks good now. Let's go to the pom.xml, which is project object model.xml, where we get the dependencies. So here what we will do now is under the dependencies section, we will add the Spring Boot starter dependency as well. Okay. So let's sorry, Spring Boot starter cache dependency it is. So once that is done, once again save it so that all your dependencies gets downloaded. So once that dependencies and everything is downloaded, now what I will do is I will simply go ahead and first create a simple controller here. Okay, and let us understand the idea behind caching. So the best practice is to create different packages for the controller, for the services and everything, which we have discussed in our previous sessions as well. So what I can do is here it will be a controller package for the controller. So I will be creating, let's call it as a cache controller. You can give any name to it. It can be your superheroes controller if you're trying to store, retrieve, update superheroes, which we have discussed in our previous series. And whatever it is, whatever your entity is, based on that you will create the controller. So I have called it as the cache controller. So let's create a controller now, and let's annotate this controller as a REST controller. Okay, so I have done that. Now for caching to be implemented, one important annotation has to be used, and that important annotation is has to be put on top of the main application, the main class. Here we will just do a enable caching. Okay, so once we use this enable caching, our Spring Boot understands that we are trying to make use of the caching in our project. Now let's go to the controller, and here in the controller the main idea is that I would just like to create a get method here. Fine, so let's create a get mapping here. I'll just have a get mapping, and my get mapping does not do anything. It'll just return me hello world or maybe some message here. Okay, so just a data, maybe hello from the API or hello from the method or something like that. Okay, so I have a get mapping, and we know that we have to make use of the response entity and all that, and then response entity dot okay and everything. So that format is actually previously shared itself here. Since my focus is only on the concept of caching, so what I will do is I will simply try and write a very simple method, so without having to write a response entity and all. But that is the standard practice. Whenever you are returning something from an API, you have to return the response entity, the HTTP status code and everything. So just to make you understand the concept, my focus now is shifted completely on the concept of Spring Boot caching rather than response entities and all. So here with this particular method, what I just want to return is I want to simply return hello from uh, the server. Okay, or maybe data retrieved from the server, something. The main idea about this particular method is to get some data from the database. I have definitely not written any database connection or anything, so this method will be executed very quickly. But for that, what I will do is I will try and forcefully add a thread dot sleep here. Okay, so once I add the thread dot sleep here, let's make it sleep for maybe 2 seconds. Okay, and we know that when we had a thread dot sleep, it has to be surrounded with a try and catch because it throws a checked exception. So I've surrounded that with a try and catch block, and what I will say is that this particular method is cacheable. Okay, so there are these annotation cacheable, the cache evict and all, so that are used to in the caching. So when we want to enable caching, we have to go to the main application here and first enable the caching. Once the caching is enabled, after that we will be using the cacheable annotation. So in the cacheable annotation, what happens is the first call to this particular method hits the database, and the second call, the data comes from the cache, not from the database. Okay, so cacheable stores the result in a cache and used for the get method. So let us first understand the idea behind what I have written so that it will be easy for you to understand the concept of caching. Consider that we have a database here and we have written our REST API here. So once we have written a REST API here, our REST API is actually communicating to the database. So once our REST API is communicating to the database, obviously it has to establish the connection and get the data from there. And there is a customer who is actually making a request to the database through a UI or something. Okay, so I am actually trying to make a request, and that request goes to the database. The data comes from the database and that data is given back to me. So for this process to happen, it obviously takes time. So since in my application I have not connected to the database, but what I have done is I have created a sleep method to deliberately make my method execute within 2 seconds, right? So it has to sleep and then it has to return me the result. So first of all, let's have a cacheable on this particular method, and I will create one more get mapping as exact same method without much of the differences here. So you can see I will create one more get mapping, and for this get mapping I'll call it as uh, without cache, and one of the get mapping I'll call it as with cache. Okay, so that we see the difference between both of them. Okay, so I will have this one without cache and one is with cache. So two methods get data, let's call it as get data wc without cache. Okay, so both returns me hello from server, let's call it as without cache, and let's call this as with cache. Fine. So the idea here is pretty much clear that whenever we are using caching, so the first hit when I make the request for the first time, what happens is I'm making a request to the REST API. REST API is making the request to the database. That means the database is connected, and whatever data, let's say I'm getting this X, Y, Z data from the database, and this X, Y, Z data will be now stored here in a cache memory. So once the data is stored in the cache memory, what happens is second time when I make a request, it will not go to the database. It will not hit the database. It will get the data from the stored cache, which obviously makes our application faster. Let us see that in real time to appreciate this particular concept. Hopefully, with this diagram, the concept is clear. That is, we don't want to establish the database connection all the time, and we want our application to run faster. That is why we are making use of caching in it. Fine. So two endpoints I have created without cache and with cache. Okay, so in both the case I have written without, so let's call this as with cache and without cache. Nothing extraordinary is written, just two annotations I have included. One is enable caching, next one is cacheable. That's it. So when I'm creating a cacheable annotation, I have to also name it. That means I have to give a name to this caching. There can be multiple cache memory available into one single Spring Boot application. So that is why we have to name it, so that if in future if I'm trying to evict it, that means if I want to clear this cache, I will be using the name of that cache to clear it. So let's call it as my cache. Okay, let's save it now. So once I save it, let's run this application as a Spring Boot application. So apart from that, I have not changed anything. So a main application, I'll just run it as Java application, which is actually a Spring Boot application. And by default, since I have not written anything to anything in the resources, my application property is empty with just a Spring application name. That means this application should be running on a default port 8080. So once this gets started, what I will do is I'll directly go to Postman. Now in the Postman, you see the magic. Okay, so in the Postman, I will hit 8080 slash. I will first try and get the data without using any cache. So two endpoints I have created here. One endpoint is without any caching implemented with it, which is without cache, and there is one more endpoint that I have created, which is with the cache. Okay, so let us see the difference between both of them. So what would be the difference when we create the methods with and without cache? So it will be localhost 8080 first I will try to hit the without cache endpoint. So when I hit this endpoint, when I send a request, so 2 seconds it has to wait. Let us first check whether the application is up or not. So there is some problem with this application. Let's see what is that. So it says illegal state. It says no cache could be resolved for the builder. Public Spring Boot get data without cache. Okay, that, yeah, that is because of this cacheable annotation. I have to remove it. I don't I have I My intention was not to create a cache on this, so that's why there was an exception. So let's run this application now. Okay, so two endpoints we have, one with the caching implemented, one without caching implemented. Chat, so 8080 which was running before, we have to stop it now. So terminate and disconnect all, remove all terminated, and then let's run the caching demo. So once this application is up and running, as discussed, we have two endpoints, so we will test those two endpoints. So once the application, yeah, you can see that application is now started. It will be started on port 8080 without cache. When I hit send, you notice that it is giving me the result after 2 seconds. 2.11 seconds is the time it is taking to give me the result, hello from server without cache. Once again I will try to call this. You can see that once again it will take 2 seconds plus some time. So as long as I keep calling it, it takes 2 plus seconds, because I have written a sleep method there. So every time it is hitting that sleep method and the sleeping for 2 seconds and then returning me the result. The exact same thing you notice I will be doing it with the cache implemented. So I will be writing the get method. Now instead of this without cache, I will change it to with cache. Now first time when I send, as I told you, when you send this request for the first time, it goes and hits the database and gets you the result. So first time when I'm hitting that request, it goes to the database. 2 seconds it will take, and I get the data saying hello from the server with the cache. But the magic happens second time when the data is stored in a cache, and next time when I hit send, it will not take 2 seconds. You can notice that it has taken 5 milliseconds to return me the data. So now as long as I keep hitting this send, I will be getting this data instantly. Why is that? That is because now the data is cached. That means the data is stored into the cache memory. So this is how we can implement caching in Spring Boot. In the next video of this, I will show you the limitations of caching. That is, what if the data gets updated, what needs to be done in that case. Okay, so I hope this series you will also enjoy this series as you have enjoyed the previous series. So thank you for your patience and thank you for your love and support. See you in the next video.